Because of my egg harvest procedure, which I discussed in my previous video, link down below and in the I had to cut down on caffeine, which opened my world up to the endless possibilities of decaf coffee. And now I can have coffee at any time of the day, and it's great. It's great. Hello everybody, I'm Oliver. This is Chaotic Bibliophile, and please let's take a second to admire the awesomeness of this shirt that I was given. I am obsessed. All right, here's the tea. After September, which was one of the worst months of my life, or not the worst, just like a very, very challenging month, I have a lot of stuff going on, but this time all good, and I am really excited, but time is of the essence. And so I haven't had a lot of time to film, and also I haven't had any time to edit. And so I am going to try and not edit this. I have already probably edited a couple of things, and I definitely need to cut in between clips, because if I did everything in one long take, it would be too much, and my laptop wouldn't be able to handle the transferring of files from my phone to the laptop to edit. So I will still have to cut some things and to stitch the clips together. But I usually also edit some of the breathing, edit some of the hesitations, the mistakes. Sometimes I leave them because they're funny, but overall, I still edit my videos, even though I'm still fairly casual and I don't script, save. I've only scripted 1 or 2 videos ever. So yeah, I want to try do less editing just for time's sake. So let's see if that works. So September, I am wrapping up September, even though I have not wrapped up July and August yet. It's just that I read so much in September, and so much of it was so good. I just want to sit here, drink my decaf coffee in my great shirt, and tell you about it. So let's begin. So as I said, September was a really weird, challenging month for me. And I was all over the place, but that meant actually that I could read a lot, because after the first few days of injections, and again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, go watch that video, at least the intro, you'll catch on. After the first few days of injections, I was too tired physically to do anything else, but my brain was still going, and I took a lot of naps in the day, so I actually had a lot of energy at night to read, and I ended up reading a lot. But of course, like, I couldn't always focus. So this is a long way of saying that I became obsessed with graphic novels again, and I have so many to tell you about. That was for the thumbnail. Yeah, so let me start with the one that I don't have here, because I lent it to my friend, because I was like, you have to read it. So already, you know, I love this. I'm gonna move it a little bit here so I can put it here, which I realize it would be better if I did it the other way around, but we're going with this. This is How I Disappear by Marion Mille, or Mali maybe. You know, everything I talk about is written in the description box, so you can check it out there. This is so beautifully drawn, but also beautifully put together, structurally, great storytelling. Mwah. It's definitely one of my favorite things that I've read this year. I have no idea how I'm going to craft a list this year, because I've read so many amazing stuff. But anyways, this is about this young woman who's at a stressful job and she's living with depression. And her relationship with her friends is very tense, because her friends don't realize how low she is, but also she doesn't know how to communicate that. She doesn't trust them. The only friend she really profoundly trusts lives away, and she's just very high strung and in a very low point. And this book made me sob because I have struggled with depression from a really young age, and I've had various treatments, and it's something that I keep checking because it's chronic and it's really easy for me to sort of go back in that space, and it's sort of really easy for me to relapse, let's say. And so I am always looking for good depictions of struggles with mental health and particularly with depression. And there is also an element of PTSD here that I found extremely relatable. I won't spoil it in case you check it out. But yeah, it was just beautiful. It is a great graphic novel from, again, a storytelling perspective, but also just I found it so personally affecting. And yeah, no notes. The art is excellent, and I loved the ending because it was quite tender and uplifting, but not in a and now all is well and everything's perfect kind of way, which is actually more uplifting than a fake saccharine ending. So yes, I 100% recommend this if you're into graphic novels, if you want a good slice of life narrative, regardless of whether you read graphic novels or not. Please check it out. This Is How I Disappear, so good. Then I finally picked up Genderqueer by Maia Kobabe, or Kobabe, which is a book that's been on the news a lot recently because it is one of those frequently banned, frequently contested books. And I really, really liked it. It is really interesting. It is a memoir of the author's journey towards understanding air gender. They use neopronouns, and that is part of the discussion here. I think it's a really interesting perspective. I do think that there are certain, not issues, just like threads of narrative, specifically in terms of sexuality, that I think are left unaddressed, not because the author owes it, it's because it is part of the discussion. So for example, the author's relationship to fanfiction and sort of the erotics of fanfiction, it's something that I personally find fascinating because it is a space that I've been a part of, again, from a young age, and I am not a part of now, but I am endlessly fascinated by, and I know friends that still are in those spaces and also that have similar relationships to their gender and fanfiction as the authors. So I was just curious, and because again it was raised in the graphic novel or memoir itself, so I was curious to see how gender and sexuality integrated a little bit more. Again, I don't think it's a discussion that needs to be a part of every narrative. It's just that because it was sort of heavily brought on early on, but then sort of faded away, I was curious about that. But I really liked it because it was really interesting to see what the author focused on, what sort of signs of gender and family, and there is something so pragmatic about this, and about how Air approaches it, that yeah, I just found it really fascinating. I think it's a really great resource. The art is also really, really great, like dynamic, and yeah, I devoured this. I read this in one sitting, so you know it's great. I just think narratively wise, like structurally from a memoir viewpoint, it could have been a little bit more polished, but you know, it's because I've read so many memoirs this year and so many graphic memoirs in general. It's just such a big part of my reading life that my standards are really, really high, but it is amazing and I do recommend it and everyone should read it. And yeah, I understand why it's been challenged, and I mean it as a compliment, but of course I want it to be readily available for everyone to read, especially younger people who need it. And another book that I want everyone to read is Thieves by Bryon. And this is a sapphic, not even coming of age, it's just like a slice of life novel that is so cute, and just I want to hug it. I actually started reading this at my shop and I wasn't going to buy it, but then I liked it so much that I was like, I want it. So I bought it. And so this is about Ella, who has a crush on Madeleine. They meet at a party. I mean, they are classmates, but they also meet at this party, and Ella gets too drunk and then wakes up at her own place, and she's surrounded by objects that she took from this party. And Madeleine turns out to be the owner of some of those objects. But is she? Or is there something else going on? And then they start dating, but also they have to team up to put things back. It's really cute. It's like first love vibes. It's just so great. It's just so great. Check it out. It's such a cute little story, but still engaging. I loved it. It was everything that I needed. And then we have The Fire That Never Goes Out. No, The Fire Never Goes Out, a memoir in pictures by Noelle Stevenson. I think this was a DNF. I don't remember if this was a DNF. I think I got like 100 pages in and then I gave up, sadly. This is by Noelle Stevenson, who's the author of Nimona, which is like a really big, I think it started as a webcomic and then it became sort of called a queer fantasy graphic novel. And this is about her coming to terms with her sexuality, but also, I think, struggling with self-image and depression. I just didn't like it. I think the style is cute. It's just very disjointed. It's one of those things where it's like, you can tell the author wants to tell her story, but I feel like she wasn't willing to really go deep enough for it to be a coherent story or like a good narrative arc. So for example, she just like tells different scenes about how she was feeling, but then she does these years in reviews, which apparently she posted to her Tumblr, so it feels like she's just filling people in because she was filling her audience in. So it feels oddly distanced. Of course, like, it is very personal and she does talk a lot about her own life and her feelings, but it's just very disjointed. It's not like a full-on narrative. It feels like a journal, which is not bad. It's just, as I was reading it, I was forcing myself to finish it because I had already paid for it and it was so short and it was so easy to read. And then I looked around this room, which is full of books, and I was like, you know what, even if it's a quick read, I don't feel like finishing it, and so I'm just not going to. It's called A Memoir in Pictures, so it does make sense that it's like a bit disjointed, but I just, and some of the ways that she describes certain emotions, I like how she draws certain emotions. It's really interesting. I can see that there were some stuff about her relationship coming up, but I just couldn't do it. I just didn't like it. So I'm sorry. It's okay if you do, but I just, yeah, it was a no from me. Another memoir that I felt was a little bit half-baked, but I loved for other reasons, is Limbo by Deb JJ Lee. This is a memoir about being Korean American and not quite finding your place anywhere, but also being depressed. And yeah, I was exploring a lot of writing on depression at the time because honestly, the injections made me depressed really, really badly. And after the procedure, I think I mentioned this in the video as well, but after the procedure, for weeks after, until I got my first tea shot, I just had side effects and I felt quite depressed. And it is not the most common of symptoms, but it is something that happens. So I just wanted to make sense of it all through media, and I'm glad I could reach for so many books and so much content. So yeah, see, literature saves lives. And so I went to Gosh Comics one day after work and I picked this up, and I'm so glad I did, because it is literally one of the most beautiful graphic novels I have ever read. The style is just a step above everything, and I found the depictions so realistic and so compelling. However, there is no story here. Again, there is not a real sense of progression, and there is no sort of arc, even though it took 5 years to construct. And it was written at distance, so I would have thought that there would have been a little bit more of sort of putting together, because also I think the author does say here that they crafted scenes and composed scenes for it to make more sense. So I think in that way it could have been a little bit tighter. I don't know. However, I will say that it's kind of like if you've read A Line Made by Walking by Sarah Baum, all these novels or works that sort of enact through their pages the affect of depression, and especially sort of being depressed and being so aloof in a way, or so distanced, and that stage of depression. By necessity, all of those works will be a bit repetitive or a bit quiet or a bit like flat. I think that's the best way of putting it. Depression isn't always flat, but a big part of depression is a big part of the everyday of sustained depression has to do with flatness, and I think that was extremely well achieved here. So I would recommend it if you're interested, if you love beautiful graphic novels, but if you want your works to be a little bit more put together, tighter, a little bit more to have a point that is sort of structurally ingrained through narrative, I think this is not for you, but I still highly recommend it, because again, the idea that it's in the title, in limbo, a lot of the times that's what depression feels like, and I think it is extremely well depicted beautifully in this novel. I read Solutions and Other Problems by Allie Brosh. I finally read this. So in case you haven't heard about this, in case this image doesn't bring war flashbacks, Allie Brosh is the author of a blog called Hyperbole and a Half, and then she published a memoir that wasn't linear. It was more like different episodes about her life. She is a very weird person, and she wears the weirdness on her sleeve very proudly. She made a whole career out of her funny observations, out of her typical like signature style, out of her humor, and sort of examining how life is odd and how a lot of the things in her life were odd. And she was a complete success, and she was supposed to go on tour, and then something really sad and unfortunate happened, and actually two really big heavy things, which she discusses here. And then she virtually became a hermit, and her whole life was upside down. And after, I think it was almost 10 years or maybe like 7 or something, she came up with this follow-up, and it is amazing. Hyperbole and a Half was good. I think at the time I gave it like 3.5 or 4 stars, because I was still giving stars, and I didn't even buy my own copy. I think I was lent it by my best friend's brother, so it was like a whole thing. I mean, it wasn't a whole thing, I just couldn't shell out the money for it. But this one, I just knew because of a review that maybe Olive from a book Olive had done, someone had said that it like was even better, it was more personal. I don't know, I just felt I had to have it and read it. And I am so glad I did. I honestly, it is just heartbreaking, but it's also hilarious. The times I laughed out loud on the tube, I just can't even. Please check it out. I promise it is substantial. It is worth it. It is so much more than just sort of internet meme culture. It's just, ooh, yeah. Please check it out. And that's it, I think, for the graphic novels. I did Shorty September too, so let's see what we have for Shorty September. Quite a lot, actually. I am glad that I signed up for Shorty September sort of mentally, because I had this pile, and whenever I was sort of in limbo with what to read next, I would consult the pile and I would pull things up from it, and yeah, it was a great time. So let's start with one thing that Quiet by Victoria Adukwei Bulley, and this is one of the most amazing poetry collections I've read in a while, and this was nominated for the Rathbones Folio Prize and won, and it was up against England's Green by Zaffar Kunial, which I've gushed about a lot on this channel. I do still think that collection I like better because it's more up my alley generally. This was more hit or miss for me, but I can still see why it won. It contains one of my favorite poems of all time, There You Are, which I will read aloud in a different video, I promise. I have learned it by heart because it's so good. It's also short, so it's not a big feat to learn, but it is so beautiful. There's a lot of in here about race and womanhood and sort of community and whiteness, and it is really interesting how it's playing with media, but also with the idea of noise and silence. Of course, it's called Quiet, and it is not a quiet collection by any means, but my favorite poem is actually all about sort of quietness and recentering yourself. There's a lot, again, about mental health and emotional states, and it's just really, really smart and interesting and impactful, but still sort of sincere, smart but not smart ass, if that makes sense. It is so good. Please check it out. One that actually was so underwhelming that I'm gonna get rid of is The Hatred of Poetry by Ben Lerner. Do I just not like Ben Lerner? I don't have any personal beef with him. I just have read 1004, which I thought was alright, but I read so much of. And then The Hatred of Poetry, which is a long form essay about poetry and like why we hate poetry, or it's ostensibly about that, but honestly I read this in one sitting, but I had to force myself to keep reading it because it was the only book that I had while I waited at the hairdressers. And I don't know, I think there is so much to say about poetry and why we hate it, or like why it is sort of instructed in us to hate it because of the way it is taught. Or even if you want to talk about like why we hate poetry, but also we can't help writing it, or like children writing and stuff, which is, again, what this essay purports to be about, then yeah, there is so much to say. But this sort of deviates into like what I personally found pointless literary analysis, and it was just like, I don't want to read this. I am getting nothing out of this. And you'd think that it might be because, yeah, I love poetry and, you know, I'm not maybe the target. Well, but the thing is that if it is like a pamphlet to convince people to read more poetry, it is not going to do that, let me tell you. I don't know. I don't know what that essay was. The only thing I got out of it was an immediate desire to go out and buy Don't Let Me Be Lonely by Claudia Rankin. And this is my first like full Claudia Rankin, because I have read like excerpts from Citizen, but I haven't read it cover to cover. And same with like some other bits of her work, but it's magnificent. I almost went on a Claudia Rankin binge, but I also don't want to exhaust all my Claudia Rankins. I mean, I'm probably going to read Citizen quite soon, but I just wanted to sort of savor the aftertaste of Don't Let Me Be Lonely, which is an amazing collection, again, about race and class in America, and also a lot, again, about depression and sort of care and how you process sort of traumas that are both individual and collective. And it is just so well written. She writes sort of poetry, essays. It has illustrations, well, pictures. It's just so insightful and so powerful. It's hybrid form at its best and brilliant, and read Claudia Rankin is what I'm saying. And speaking of brilliant, the last book I'm going to tell you about, because I've gotten quite tired, and so I'm gonna film part 2 later this week, On Connection by Kae Tempest. And this is hilarious. If you've seen my Booktuber meetup wrap up, link down below and in the eye, you'll know I got it there. Everyone told me it was brilliant. I had to read it. It's lovely. It is. If you haven't read it, pick it up. It is very short, but it is so substantial. I got so much out of it. It is just so interesting. And it's a long form essay all about the power of poetry, actually. I should have... Anyways, that was poor planning on my part, or no planning. Yeah, so it is about reading poetry aloud in a room and its transformative power. But what I love is that Kae Tempest resists cynicism while at the same time being completely aware of how it can be seen as decadent or luxurious to care about these things while the world is on fire. And I've been thinking about this. I think a lot of us have been thinking about stuff like this recently, especially. And it is just such a joy to read, because Kae Tempest's faith in humanity and in humans' capacity for connection is just so remarkable, so fantastic. But at the same time, their critiques to society and how we organize society is also really poignant, even though it's not the main focus. And so the idea of connection and how much value they place on connection is just beautiful, and it's beautifully put. I saw Kae read at Trans Pride earlier this year, and it was just mind-blowing, and that is what made me want to read this even more. Now, I haven't read their poetry yet, but their latest collection sounds amazing, so I'm definitely going to check that out. And yeah, really, really good. So that's all I've got for you today. I want to go and see if I can edit this right away. Actually, I think that would be mighty helpful. I will be back with part 2 of this wrap up as soon as I can. And in the meantime, tell me what you've been reading. Tell me how you've been feeling. If you're in the UK, how do you feel about the fact that we basically skipped autumn? It was so warm, and then suddenly it was chilly, and we haven't had any fall, I feel like. Yeah. Anyways, see you next time.